Now, the late singer Prince's friends and family have held a private memorial for the music superstar after his body was cremated. A private ceremony celebrating his life was held at Paisley Park yesterday. The singer has also left behind a huge amount of unpublished material. So the question is, what's next for his legacy? Well, Stephen Budd is artist manager and chair of the Music Managers Forum. Joins us now live from Central, and thanks for joining us, Stephen. I guess the first question is, fans are going to want to know, when can we hear this music? Because it reminds me of when Amy Winehouse passed away. There was this unreleased material and questions over whether or not anybody else could really do it justice.
Well, you know, I imagine it might take some time. This is very complicated. Prince was putting out his own records since 1996, I think. So there's a huge catalogue of unreleased material which is in a vault underneath his Paisley Park studio in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. And apparently it contains all of the stuff that he'd been working on, future albums, but recordings from as far back as 1976. The recordings that are between 1976 and 1996 will be co-owned by Warner Music, so they'll have a big input and say around that whole thing, and I'm sure they're will be wanting to put together unreleased material. Whether they're going to be able to get access to it that easily is another matter. It's now going to be a matter for Prince's estate, who I imagine are in a bit of a state of shock and thinking about other things right now, to decide how his legacy music catalogue is going to be treated. But apparently there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of recordings in that vault. Prince was incredibly prolific, often working on albums 3-4 albums ahead of the curve, in a way that other artists just didn't do. He had his own studios at Paisley Park. He would record there 7 days a week. He was absolutely fanatical about his work ethic. I used to manage an engineer who worked with him at Paisley Park, so I got a little bit of an insight into that. And also, whenever he went on the road, he would record every show that he performed at. He would also have mobile recording studios with him on the road. He'd often book into studios in different cities, so he was recording all of the time. And he didn't want to release material in the way that normal artists do, which is one album, then tour, then take 2 years off, write another album, then go out and put another album out and then tour again. He wanted to release stuff all the time, and in fact he already released nearly 40 studio albums, which is quite incredible in a career such as his.
I mean, you were just saying he would put out his own music. I mean, we've heard a lot over the last few days about how he was a real perfectionist. You're saying about how he used to record concerts. Was that quite unusual then, the relationship that he had with the record labels, where he really was in control? He only released stuff when he was totally happy. And was that perhaps because he was such a huge star, he could afford to do that, he could be in that position?
Well, he fell out with Warner Brothers back in the mid-90s because he wanted to release stuff, a lot more stuff than they wanted him to release. They wanted him to release one album every 18 months or 2 years. He wanted to release an album almost every 6 months. So they fell out with each other over that. And you may remember the whole furore around the period when he wrote the word slave across his cheek, which was a reference to that situation. And he used that to get out of his deal with Warner's. And in fact, for a period of time, he used the symbol instead of his own name, which was also a mechanism for him to get out of that contract with Warner Brothers. It was a shame that that arrangement fell apart because they were actually quite a good match for each other. And of course, that period, with the exception of The Most Beautiful Girl in the World, which was obviously a big hit, represented his biggest, sort of most highest profile hits across the years. But he decided, and quite, you know, every artist is entitled to do that he wanted to release his own music under his own time schedule in the way that he wanted to do it. And he's done that with actually some amazing results over the last few years. Some of the albums sold very little. Some of them sold quite a bit and became gold and platinum albums in the UK and in America. But it's an example of, I suppose, artist power, and this man was so in control of his own image, his videos, his music. He wrote everything, he played everything himself as well, or he could play everything himself. Of course, he employed some of the greatest musicians on the planet to work with him. But he was a unique person, but with a massive output. Now, it's going to be interesting to see. I hear rumours that there's some incredible unreleased material from stuff that he did in the 70s and 80s that he just didn't feel was right for that particular record, but is as good as anything that he ever released. I'd be very, very interested to hear that material.
Stephen, we're going to have to leave it there, but very, 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 very quickly, before you go, that symbol, how did you pronounce it? Did anybody ever find out?
Well, if you know, or if you can find out, then that's a special thing. I don't know whether there was an actual pronunciation for it, but it was a very clever idea just to have a graphic representation of the name rather than using his name.
And that mystique will continue forevermore, I gather now.
Indeed.
All right, Stephen, thanks so very much for your time. Appreciate it.